They dragged me out by my arms while my badge was still clipped to my jacket. The same badge that had opened every door in that building for the past 6 years. By the time my knees hit the pavement outside, 3 people had already pulled out their phones. I didn't know it then, but one of those videos would cost the city $4 million. But let me take you back to that morning, because nothing about it felt like the beginning of the worst day of my life. My name was Adrian Cole, and I was a senior code enforcement officer for the city of Harlan, a title I had spent 11 years working toward, starting as an unpaid intern who filed reports nobody ever read and made coffee for people who never said thank you. I was good at this job. Not good considering, not impressive for someone in her position, just good. My case closure rate was the highest in the division 3 years running. The plaques on my home office wall proved it. Not that I needed the reminder anymore. What I needed that particular Tuesday morning was coffee strong enough to kickstart my legs, because I had spent most of Monday night reviewing permits for a disputed renovation site on Creighton Avenue and hadn't managed sleep until nearly 3. The building I was heading to was the Harlan Municipal Annex, a wide glass-fronted structure at 5th and Monroe that housed 6 city departments, 2 small courtrooms, and a coffee cart on the first floor that produced espresso so reliably terrible it had become something of an in-joke among the staff. I had been in and out of that building hundreds of times. The morning security team knew my face the way you know a piece of furniture. Not really seeing it anymore, just registering its presence as part of the room's normal arrangement, which suited me fine. I wasn't there to be seen. I needed to pull the Creighton Avenue permit records, get upstairs, and make my 9:15 with the site contractor before he started billing me for his time. The morning air had a late October bite to it, the kind that finds its way under a collar no matter how carefully you've dressed. I had on my gray wool coat, badge clipped to the left lapel the way I always wore it, leather satchel over one shoulder. I remember the sound my heels made on the lobby's granite floor as I walked in. Clean, purposeful. I remember the smell of the place, floor polish and stale floral air freshener, the particular scent of recycled government building air. Normal Tuesday. Completely ordinary Tuesday. The regular morning guard, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who had once lent me an umbrella during a rainstorm and never once asked for it back, was not at the desk. In his place stood 2 officers I had never seen before. One was tall, with close-cropped hair and an expression like he had been disappointed by something before he'd even left the house that morning. The other was younger, shorter, almost fidgety. His hand kept drifting toward the radio on his belt, without quite landing on it. A third man in a dark security blazer stood off to one side with his arms crossed, watching the lobby the way a person watches a door they expect to open. I walked up, reached for the badge scanner the way I had done 1,000 times, and pressed my city-issued card against the reader. It beeped once. Red light. I pulled the badge back, checked the chip end, pressed it again. Red light. The tall officer looked up from whatever he had been reading. "There's a problem with your card," he said. Not a question, not an offer to help, a statement with the door already closing behind it. "This sometimes happens with the reader," I said, keeping my voice even. "My name is Adrian Cole, Senior Code Enforcement, Department of Buildings. I have a 915 upstairs. If the scanner isn't reading it, there's a desk phone right there. You can call up to my department and confirm in about 30 seconds. He looked at the badge in my hand, then at me, then back at the badge. The kind of look that takes half a second but somehow manages to say an entire paragraph. "We're going to need you to step aside, ma'am." Something cold and small moved through my chest. Not panic. I was not someone who panicked easily. Something more like the sensation you get when you hear a sound that doesn't belong in a familiar room. "Step aside to where?" I asked. "I've worked in this building for 6 years. I'm a city employee with a valid credential and an active meeting scheduled upstairs. I'm not stepping aside. I'm asking you to make a phone call. Ma'am, step aside. The shorter officer had stopped touching his radio. He was watching me now with an expression that was still deciding what to become. The man in the blazer hadn't moved a muscle. What happened next took maybe 30 seconds. The tall officer stepped around the desk and said something. I have turned the words over 100 times since, and I still cannot quite reconstruct them. They came too fast. Something about a secured premises and needing to exit. I said I wasn't exiting, because I worked there and had every legal right to be standing exactly where I was standing. I reached for my phone to call my supervisor directly. He grabbed my arm, not violently at first, more like a grip that said the conversation was over. But I pulled back, not aggressively, just the way any person pulls back when a stranger's hand closes around their arm without permission. That was when the shorter officer moved in from the other side. They walked me toward the door. My feet were barely making contact with the floor. My satchel strap caught on the door handle and snapped loose entirely, scattering files across the granite in a wide paper arc. Someone behind me made a sharp sound, surprise or discomfort, and I heard the small manufactured click of a phone camera shutter, and then another, and then a third. Outside, on the sidewalk, one of them released my arm. I stumbled forward. My left knee hit the pavement, and the cold from the granite came through my slacks like a current. I held that position for a moment, staring at the ground, listening to the heavy pressurized thud of the lobby door closing behind me. Then I sat back on my heels, and the October air hit my face. My badge was still clipped to my lapel, a little crooked. I reached up and straightened it, for no reason at all except that some habits don't stop to ask permission. A woman in a tan coat had stopped on the sidewalk 3 feet away, her phone still raised. She was maybe 30, dark-haired. Her expression caught somewhere between horrified and uncertain, like someone who had witnessed something they didn't yet have words for. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I work in that building," I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I have worked in that building for 6 years. She looked from me to the glass doors and back. Then she lowered her phone slowly. "I got all of it," she said quietly, "from when they first grabbed you." I nodded once. I wasn't going to cry on that sidewalk. I had made that decision somewhere between the lobby door and the pavement, and I was keeping it. But behind my ribs, something was quietly rearranging itself into a shape I hadn't felt before. Not anger, not yet. Something harder and more patient than anger. I stood up, brushed the street grit off my knee, gathered what files I could reach from where they had landed near the door, and called my supervisor. Marcus picked up on the 4th ring, his voice carrying the background noise of a meeting he hadn't quite left. "Adrian, you in the building?" "No," I said. "I was just removed from the lobby by 2 contract officers I've never seen before. My badge didn't scan. They didn't offer to call upstairs. They put their hands on me and walked me out the front entrance." Silence. The real kind. Not the pause of someone choosing words, but the stillness of someone who has just understood they are standing inside a serious problem. "Don't go back in," Marcus said. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming down." The line went dead. I stood on the sidewalk with the phone pressed to my ear a few seconds after he had already hung up, watching the morning crowd part around me without slowing. A man in a construction vest glanced at me twice. A woman with a stroller didn't look at all. The city went on the way it always does, indifferent, the way rivers don't notice what falls into them. I looked back through the glass at the lobby. The tall officer had returned to the desk. The shorter one was leaning against the wall, checking his phone. They were not watching me. I had already been resolved. I was a disturbance that had been moved outside, and outside was where disturbances went. My knee was beginning to register the fall properly now, a dull and specific ache right below the cap. I looked down at the scuff mark on my slacks. Gray wool, dry clean, only. I had paid more for those slacks than most people thought was sensible, because I had learned early, very early, in a way you only learn when the alternative is invisible, that in my line of work, the way you walked into a room was the first data point anyone used to decide how much of your expertise to actually hear. Badge, coat, heels, posture. 6 years of arriving prepared and leaving with results, and none of it had mattered for 30 seconds. Marcus came through the glass doors 8 minutes later, coat half-buttoned, moving like a man still catching up with his own urgency. He took in my expression, my knee, the strap on my satchel hanging by one attached corner, and said my name like a period at the end of a sentence he hadn't started. "They're contract staff," he said, before I could speak. "Private firm brought in starting yesterday. Gerald called in sick. There was a memo about supplemental security coverage. There was no memo telling me I'd need anything beyond my existing city-issued credentials to enter my own building. You shouldn't have." His voice was flat and deliberate. "This needs to go through HR, and probably higher than that." Probably higher. I filed those 2 words somewhere I planned to return to. "There's video," I said. "At least one person inside the lobby filmed it. The woman who was standing outside got everything from the moment they touched me." Marcus went very still. The kind of still that happens when a person's internal calculation suddenly changes every variable at once. "How much did she get?" he asked. "Enough," I said. The HR office on the 4th floor smelled like printer toner and carpet that hadn't been replaced since the building was new. I sat across from a woman named Patricia Voss, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead like a second set of eyes that didn't trust the first, and watched her read the incident report Marcus had filed 40 minutes after walking me back inside through a side entrance, using his own credential to get me through the door of my own building. Patricia read slowly, touching the corner of each page before turning it, the way people touch things they'd rather not be holding. "Ms. Cole," she said finally, setting the pages down with a care that felt performative, "I want to begin by saying that what you've described is deeply concerning, and we take incidents of this nature extremely seriously." The phrase, "incidents of this nature," landed in my ears like a stone dropped into still water. Flat. Precomposed. Already framed as a category rather than an event. "What I've described," I said, keeping my voice at the temperature of a well-lit corridor, "is being physically removed from a city building by contract officers who disregarded my valid city-issued credentials and declined to make a verification call that would have taken 30 seconds. That's what I've described." Patricia nodded with the practiced rhythm of someone whose job required nodding to remain employed. "The security contractor has been contacted," she said. "The officers involved will be identified and interviewed. We want to be thorough." "There's video," I said, for the second time that morning, and watched her stop nodding. I had messaged the woman from the sidewalk. Her name was Donna Reyes, and she worked for a nonprofit 2 blocks east, within 20 minutes of the incident. She had sent me the file without a single condition attached. Just a link. Clean and direct, with a message that said only this shouldn't have happened. 47 seconds of footage, shot in portrait mode, slightly shaky from the angle she'd had to hold the phone, but clear. Completely, unambiguously clear. My badge, visible on my lapel. Both officers with their hands on my arms. The moment my satchel caught on the door, my knee hitting the pavement outside. I watched Patricia Voss look at her notepad and decide not to write anything on it. "We'll need time to review the footage as part of our internal process," she said. "I've already sent a copy to my personal attorney," I said. "Courtesy, in case the internal process needs a reference point." I hadn't yet, but I made the call from the parking structure 20 minutes later, sitting in my car with the engine running and the heat turned all the way up because my hands had finally started shaking. Not from fear, but from the specific exhaustion of holding yourself together inside a room designed to make you feel like the problem. My attorney was a woman named Celeste Moran, whom I had retained 18 months earlier for a completely different matter. A contract dispute with a vendor that had resolved before it reached the courts. I had kept her number because Celeste was the kind of person you keep on speed dial the way you keep a fire extinguisher. Hopefully never necessary, but the difference between inconvenience and catastrophe when it is. She answered on the second ring. "Talk to me," she said. I told her everything in sequential order, the way she had taught me, times, names, locations, exact words where I remembered them. When I finished, there was a pause just long enough for her to have written everything down. "How's the knee?" she asked. "Bruised, not serious. Go to urgent care anyway. Today. Get it documented." Her voice was level and efficient the way a scalpel is level and efficient. "Don't post anything. Don't speak to the contractor or the officers independently. And send me that video file in the next hour. I also want the full name of the HR rep and whether the meeting was documented." Patricia Voss. It was. Marcus was present for the first 10 minutes. "Good. Adrian, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without it changing the way you behave in that building for the next several weeks. Tell me. This is not an internal HR matter anymore. What you're describing, the physical removal, the disregard of valid credentials, the documentation of the incident, this touches the city's liability in a way that Patricia Voss's notepad is not equipped to contain. They will try to manage this quietly. Don't let them. I sat with that for a moment. Through the windshield, the parking structure's concrete pillar had a crack running from floor to ceiling, painted over so many times the repair had become its own texture. "I have no intention of letting them," I said. The next 3 weeks were the kind of quiet that has teeth. The city's legal department made first contact with Celeste on day 4, not to acknowledge liability, but to request a meeting to discuss the circumstances of the incident in a collaborative spirit. Celeste declined the meeting and submitted a formal notice of intent to file. On day 9, I was called into a second HR meeting, this time with a city attorney present, a young man named Garrett, who kept his jacket buttoned even though the room was warm. He slid a 1-page document across the table, a non-disclosure agreement attached to a preliminary settlement figure that Patricia Voss was very careful not to read aloud. I looked at the number, turned the page over to see if there was more on the back. There wasn't. "This is what you're offering," I said. It was not a question. "It's a starting point for conversation," Garrett said, with the careful neutrality of someone who had been coached on exactly those words. I turned the page back over, pushed it across the table toward him with one finger. "The video has been viewed over 200,000 times," I said. "As of this morning. I imagine your starting point will shift accordingly. I had not been the one to post it. Dana Reyes had uploaded it to her personal account on day 2, with a caption that was 3 sentences long and entirely factual. She had tagged the city's official accounts. By the time I woke up on day 3, my phone had 57 missed calls, and a producer from a local news affiliate had left a voicemail that started with Ms. Cole, "I'm so sorry to reach out this way," in a tone that suggested she was not sorry at all. I gave one interview, one to a reporter named Josephine Park, who had a reputation for not letting people finish sentences without checking what was underneath them. I wore the same gray wool coat. My badge was clipped to the lapel. I did not cry. I said, clearly and without embellishment, "I am a city employee with 11 years of service, a valid credential, and a documented performance record. 2 contract officers placed their hands on me and removed me from my workplace. I have a bruised knee and a torn satchel strap. The city has offered me a figure that does not reflect the seriousness of what occurred. That is all I have to say at this time. Josephine ran the segment that evening with the full video embedded. By morning, the viewing count had cleared 800,000. The mayor's office released a statement expressing concern and promising a comprehensive review. The security contractor issued an apology that used the phrase, "did not follow established protocols," 4 times in 6 sentences. The 2 officers were suspended from their contract, pending investigation. Garrett called Celeste on day 22. The new number he offered was not a starting point. It was an attempt at a finish line. Celeste called me after. 4 million, she said, without preamble. The warmth that came up through my chest then was not triumph. It was something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of a door locking after you've finally been allowed to leave a room you never should have been put in. And the policy changes, I said, because we had asked for more than money. We had asked for mandatory bias and credential verification training for all contract security personnel engaged by the city. We had asked for a formal written acknowledgement of the incident to be placed in the city's official record. We had asked for a review of the contractor selection process. Celeste had included all of it in the filing, and I had refused to remove a single item as concessions were negotiated. All of it, Celeste said. The training protocol goes into effect within 90 days. The acknowledgement is being drafted as we speak. I was standing in my kitchen when she told me. The window over the sink faced east, and the late afternoon light was doing something particular to the dust in the air, illuminating it in a way that made the room feel more inhabited than usual, warmer. I had a coffee cup in my hand that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The city released the settlement terms publicly 6 days later. Patricia Voss did not appear in any of the subsequent press coverage. Garrett gave a brief statement outside the courthouse that consisted entirely of language no one would remember. The security contractor's city contract was not renewed at the end of the fiscal quarter. I learned that from a 2-paragraph item buried on page 7 of the local business section, the kind of ending that arrives without ceremony because the people it happens to preferred it that way. I returned to the Harlan Municipal Annex on a Thursday morning in mid-February, 4 months after the incident. The new security personnel were city-employed, not contracted. The badge reader had been updated. I pressed my card against it, and the light turned green with a clean, quiet beep, the way it always should have. The woman at the desk, young, maybe 25, with her lanyard still slightly askew in the way of someone just finding their routine, glanced up with a professionally neutral expression that shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something else as she registered my badge and my face. "Miss Cole," she said. "Good morning," I said. I took the elevator to my floor, hung my coat on the hook behind my office door, and sat down at my desk. The plaques on the wall were the same. The filing system was the same. The view from my window, the same stretch of 5th Street, the same trees just beginning to consider the possibility of spring, was the same. And I was not the same in the ways that matter and the ways that don't undo you. On my desk was the satchel, not the torn one, a new one, identical make and model, purchased the week after the settlement. But inside it, in the front pocket where I kept things I chose to keep, was the broken length of strap from the original. I had never thrown it away. I wasn't sure I would. It was a small, unremarkable piece of dark leather, and it meant nothing to anyone who didn't know. It meant everything to me, not because of what had been taken, but because of what I had chosen to do with that taking. I set my coffee down on the desk, looked out the window at the city going about its ordinary Tuesday business, the way cities do, indifferent and relentless, entirely unaware of the specific weight of any single person standing inside it. Then I opened my case files and I went back to work.